With no further ado, William Mumma, President of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, and Eric Metaxas, author of numerous books, including Bonhoeffer and Miracles. They'll get our day going, and going well, with a conversation about the moral foundations of a great society. We welcome Bill and Eric.
Can you hear me? Which one's Mayweather, which one's Pacquiao?
I am Pacquiano. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Those of you who've seen Eric Metaxas in any setting realize I'm terrified.
Oh,
But my real anxiety is that my daughter is in labor this instant. So I'm waiting to hear, boy or girl.
imagine.
Eric?
Well, it's one or the other, I guarantee it.
Yeah. Well said.
My daughter is 15 and a half, not married that we know of, and not in labor
There you go.
at this point.
But she's a lovely young woman. I've met her. So.
Now, how are we going to have this conversation?
I was thinking we could, there's been a lot of smart people and politically sort of promising people here. You and I are neither. So I thought we might try to get around the topic in a way that no one can quarrel with us.
Correct.
So I thought maybe we would talk about religion,
Yeah.
and then religious liberty, and then give everyone some really wise advice.
Yeah.
What do you
Well, I was not thinking that, but
No.
I'm happy to go in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm always curious. My wife's going to say, how many people were there? So if you don't mind, if you're here this morning, would you just raise your hand so I can get a quick...
Do they have to count out?
Many of you are
Yeah.
here. That's excellent. Have another cup of coffee and then raise your hand. I'm religion.
Well, I was thinking, I've tried to read all of Eric's books because he's very vain, and if you don't, he gets upset with you. But
I don't care if you read them. Just purchase them. I don't care.
Eric, in Amazing Grace, one of the things that popped out at me was how morally corrupt England was before Wilberforce, really sort of entered the prime of his life. And that seems strange to me because I was brought up with the image of Victorian England, so chaste, so sober, so sound, so everything good.
Yeah.
And yet there was this society. I mean, what was that all about?
We don't have time for me to give my Wilberforce speech, but I give it all over the country. If people have already heard me talk on Bonhoeffer, then what else you got? I've got a few things I talk about. And the problem is, these things are all tremendously important, and people aren't talking about them. The story of Wilberforce, the nutshell version, if you know anything about him, you know that he's the great parliamentarian who, because of his Christian faith, led the battle against the slave trade in the British Empire. Anybody who tells you that everybody knows slavery is wrong, since the beginning of time, slavery was considered just one of those things. It's an unpleasant reality. But nobody thought it's morally wrong unless you believe what it says in the Bible. I mean, we got to get real here. If somebody says, well, racism is wrong and slavery is wrong, I want to say to you, well, okay, why? Tell me why. I know why, but you tell me why. You're so sure it's wrong. Wilberforce lived in a world where they were honest about this. Racism was fine, slavery was fine, whatever. He had to say, no, we're a Christian nation, therefore, according to this book, we're supposed to love our enemies, treat other people as we would want to be treated. These are not options. This is not extra credit. Slavery is fundamentally immoral, and whatever it means to us economically, we must abolish it because we claim to be Christians, right? So we know the story of Wilberforce. He did that. He led the battle, this great crusade. But what we don't know typically, and it's in my book Amazing Grace, I didn't know it myself, is that because of his faith, and I underscore that, because it's not just because he was a nice guy. Because of his faith, he saw all kinds of evils that other people who had no faith did not see. And historically speaking, and most of us don't know this either. I didn't know it until I wrote this book about Wilberforce. Great Britain, as Bill just said, was tremendously broken in the 18th century. It was morally utterly broken. We think of the social evil of the slave trade. And we all go, yeah, that's terrible, that's terrible. Well, what do you think? Was it a wonderful society except they had slavery? It was a very broken society because, effectively speaking, the Christian faith, biblical values were not there. So it was effectively a pagan, broken society where it was entirely legitimate to treat other human beings like dirt, like cattle, like chattel. It was utterly expected. This is how human beings have treated each other since the beginning of time, and So Wilberforce comes into this situation. He becomes radically saved, I would use that word. He has a radical conversion. He was not some evil person, but something happens around his 26th birthday, and suddenly he has this epiphany, and in that world you think, okay, I've gotten serious about God. Jesus has come into my life. I guess I better leave politics because it's the dirtiest business around. And he visits his friend John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, says, what do I do? John Newton says, stay in politics. God will use you there. And the punchline is that he spent the next decades bringing his faith into the public square and helping Great Britain live up to its claim to be a Christian culture, a Christian nation. And this is the point that Bill wanted to bring up. He did it. He didn't talk about it. He didn't say, wouldn't it be nice if? He was able, by the grace of God, let's be clear, and working with a ton of like-minded people, but also influencing them, being a tremendous catalyst. One person was able to take Great Britain from being an outrageously broken culture. And again, if you don't believe me, you do the math. And in a number of decades succeeded dramatically in turning things around.
And this is from that book. I wrote it down, but so Eric said, slavery was only the worst of a host of societal evils that included epidemic alcoholism, child prostitution, child labor, frequent public executions for petty crimes, public dissection and burnings of executed criminals, and unspeakable cruelty to animals. But of course, all this was accompanied by an elite that paid a lip service to their faith, but actually were openly or privately dismissive of the whole fabric of it. Right? They just didn't care. And so here was this transformation. But Eric, when you think of that, you say, well, okay, this whole narrative we get all the time is that morality goes one way. And then we're all supposed to succumb to despair because without question, we're in a bad cycle in terms of our public morality. So if you bought the idea that morality goes one way and you've looked at the reality in front of you that it's going down, you have to give up. There's this cycle.
History has already decided, right? We're going to hell. There's nothing anyone can do. So you better get with the program and enjoy the ride to hell. That's all we can do.
Yeah. And so here's this great example of England, which, in the not too distant past, did the exact opposite of what that storyline tells you. But one of the things that occurred to me then is to say, the church in England wasn't a very good leader in this way. All the churches.
That's an understatement.
Especially the church. Then I started thinking of your book, Bonhoeffer. And this was Dietrich Bonhoeffer's big problem, is the Lutheran Church seemed unable to respond to the challenge of the evils of Nazism. So I was wondering what you think about the churches in America today. Are they playing the role of the Lutheran Church or the role of the Anglican Church in the time of Wilberforce?
Of course.
Where are they? What's going on right now?
I mean, I'll put my cards on the table. The church is not the church. Okay? The church, Jesus, if you're a Christian, you know that he decides who is the church. His people who are obedient, doing his will, that's the church. So just because you belong to a church, you're on the rolls, you give some money, whatever, God is not impressed. In fact, you'll find out how unimpressed he is eventually. So you can't fool God. Fig leaves couldn't fool him. You can't fool him. Nothing can fool him. He decides who is his church, and his people who do his will, that is his church. And so in Great Britain, you had the Church of England. They were almost as bad as they are today. Any Episcopalians here? The point is that it doesn't matter if you say we're the church or if we say we're a Christian nation. If you're not behaving that way, who cares, okay? So you had an entire nation in Great Britain that say they're Christian. Wilberforce, to use present tense terminology, he was born again. Something happened where the scales fell from his eyes and he realized that now I believe. And he looked around at a landscape that was nominally Christian, and he said, none of these people believe, but they're just going through the motions, and I've got to wake them up. I've got to say, look, this is real. If you want to claim to be a Christian nation, you've got to do this and this and this and this. And by God's grace, I mean, it is a stunning historical reality. He succeeded. I mean, it was Bill's idea to bring this up. He actually succeeded in waking up the church, and not just the church. Let's get real. Anybody in England who had a conscience, anybody said, this man is right. He's making a point. He was able over the course of decades to succeed. Bonhoeffer, it's the opposite story. Mm-hmm. The church in Germany, same kind of thing. I mean, similar. That when the evil of Nazism arose, I mean, it's in some ways it's quite different, but it is similar. He was trying to get them to see what was happening. It's by God's grace that he was able to see most Germans, Christians, many of them good Christians, were blind to the evil. They kept making excuses. They kept thinking that it's very easy for us to say, well, how could they not know that Hitler and the Nazis were evil? Trust me, if you were there then, if I was there then, we would have been blind to it. Because Hitler was basically saying, we're going to restore morality to Germany. We're going to wipe out atheistic communism. We're going to wipe it out. So if you're not really paying attention, and most people weren't, and most people don't, and we don't, you go, yeah, that's well, he's not perfect, but. Bonhoeffer understood that the Nazis are the enemy of the true church in Germany. They'll play patty cake with the church, but the true church, if you're serious about God and about God's purposes, you are the enemy of National Socialism, and they know it, and they're going to pick us off one by one. That's what they did, basically. As he was trying to wake up the church to say, stand and be the church, they kept saying, well. And the image I think of, and because the parallel to the U.S. at this point, unfortunately, is dramatic. It's like Gulliver being tied down by the Lilliputians. At any moment, if he wakes up, he can stand up and rip off the ropes or whatever. But there's going to come a time where there's enough of these ropes that if he wakes up after that moment, he cannot stand up, right? That's how I see the church in Germany. Bonhoeffer is trying to wake up the church and saying that the state is secular and it's trying to impose its secular orthodoxy and it's trying to neutralize you. But if you wake up, they won't be able to do it. So they've got to do it subtly, slowly. They don't want to wake you up. And at some point, they will have succeeded, and then you can wake up all you want. There's nothing you can do. That's the issue for me for religious liberty in America. The church doesn't think it's time. We don't need to get up yet. Wait. We're talking about this. Bonhoeffer is as Wilberforce is the case that says, you can do it, believe you can do it. Bonhoeffer is the case to say, if you don't do it, it doesn't have to go well.
So then, you've sort of picked at it both ways. Let me switch a little bit for a second. Skipping whether people are awake to this scenario, what about just religion in America? You travel around a lot, you talk to people, your book Miracle is fantastic. What's going on in the religious life of Americans, broadly speaking?
Well, we all know this. William F. Buckley always spoke about it, that the elites never get it. The elites tend to be secular, the governing elites, and the people, the first 1,000 names in the Boston phone book, those people tend to get it, right? So in middle America, most Americans, if you corner them about what they believe in God, they believe in morality, they haven't imbibed the nonsense of our elite institutions, this idea that, life has no meaning and we have to deal with that or not think about the big questions. They think about the big questions. Who am I? What am I to do? There is no question that the founders understood this, and our elites today do not understand this. And unfortunately, many conservative elites don't understand this. The founders knew that without a robust faith in America, America could not be, right? In other words, there is no America, there's no self-government that will succeed for long unless you have a population that governs itself. I don't steal, why? Because the cops will catch me? No. I don't steal because I know that it's wrong, right? Now, you don't have to be a person of faith, but typically that's what the founders understood, that typically when faith is robustly expressed, you're going to have a population that governs itself. That's what we have set up. If we don't have that, it won't work. So the role of religion, we've taken it for granted, just like they did in Germany, frankly, is that you take it so for granted because we have had so much of that. We've had so much religious freedom and so much ability to express our faith in America. But what we don't realize is that if you begin to take that away, we cease to be America. We cannot govern ourselves. It's not going to work. So the threat to religious liberty that we're seeing, the real threat, I mean, it's happening right now. If you start telling people what they can and cannot do, that your faith, you can't believe in a traditional view of marriage, for example. This is starting to be a secular orthodoxy, which is against the Constitution in terms of an establishment of religion. When the government starts saying, we're going to go with this way of seeing the world, it's akin to an establishment of a religion. And it's not just unconstitutional, it's suicidal. We will kill America if we do that. Just as the government is not supposed to pick winners in the economic sphere, you all get that, I hope, right? They're supposed to be agnostic on that issue. We let you decide, we let the market decide. We don't pick winners. Well, what if the government starts picking winners in the world of ideas and it just says, like, we're gonna fund that big company and we're gonna let that one die. We're gonna fund that idea, that religion, and we're gonna let that one die. We're gonna fund secular humanism and that worldview. We're gonna get behind that with the strength and the power of the state, and we're gonna let those die out. We have at that moment ceased to be America. The founders understood this, and I just want to say that my generation, we didn't learn this in school. We don't understand this. I'm actually writing a book about this now because I'm stunned that most Americans my age and younger don't understand the very basics of what the founders understood about the role of faith, about the role, I mean, all of these things. We're talking about liberty ultimately,
and this really
it's
becomes
horrifying.
the critical point, which I think everybody worries about. And yet, call it optimism here in this conference. I turn out to be very optimistic on this score.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, one of the reasons is you read these surveys where they say the rising number of nuns. And I want to tell you that I'm a former nun.
N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah, I'm a former nun, and with all the hype about transgenderism, I
Yeah.
mean I'm a former N-O-N-E.
Right.
You know, I'm a person who self-identified as no religion. Why? I was raised in a household with zero religious belief or instruction. You know, we weren't anything. Mumma is historically Mennonite Amish, but not for generations. So in my early years, when I was a teenager, I got the call, what's the answer to the great questions? And I came to that answer, and I've been a Roman Catholic for my whole adult life. Okay, so I don't look at the world of nuns and see, atheists. I look at the world of nuns and see me. That's it. Every generation, people have to answer the call. There's a great optimism there. Now, that's my own personal story, but I will tell you, at the Becket Fund, we've been more and more doing some privately commissioned research, not to put out a push poll that says 83% love this and 16% hate that. We want to research what people really think about religion and religious freedom. And it turns out people are remarkably supportive of religious freedom, very supportive of religion, their own religion, and the willingness to let other people come to the answer. But they're super confused about how that plays itself out in society and the law, which goes back to the Wilberforce. There's a great opportunity. The American people are ready, able, and willing, but it takes leadership. So I think we're well away from the stage where Gulliver is all tied down. We're more than ready to wake up, but it's going to take some effort on people's part to do that. So.
I actually would maybe semantically disagree in the sense that I would say that there is no question that things can turn out right. Mm-hmm. But here's what I would say to be dramatic about it, is that unless we act now, they won't turn out right. And so it really is up to us. I mean, I speak to groups all over America, and I say, like, if you've got money put away for a rainy day, now is the time to spend it.
It's raining right now. Yeah.
Now is the time to spend it, either on a candidate or give it to the Becket Fund or whatever, but God will judge you. because this is it, folks.
National Review, thank you very much.
This is it.
Yeah.
But I really mean it. This is it.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity that the story of Wilberforce shows us which way it can go, and the story of Bonhoeffer shows us which way it can go. And so to anybody who says, it's all going to hell in a handbasket, I would say exactly what Bill says. Absolutely not. If you want it to, just sit on your hands and it will. But there is no doubt in my mind that even the story of Bonhoeffer is given to us as a warning to say, you see what happened?
Yeah.
Don't let this happen to you. It will happen in America, but it doesn't have to happen in America. It's genuinely up to us.
And I think we have some advantages in America that both Bonhoeffer and Wilberforce didn't have. We have plenty of disadvantages too, but the advantage is that the American system is structured for a series of arenas. Think Mayweather and Pacquiao, but these are contests. People, by their nature, love a contest. They like to see contestants come into the ring.
Right.
They like to see a winner or loser. That has an edifying effect. People begin to understand things that they had before that point not thought about. The two forms of contest that Americans love outside of sports are political campaigns and court fights. So at the Beckett Fund, we're an appellate law firm. We defend religious liberty for all, which means we go to the higher courts of the land and we have arguments. And those arguments are conducted before judges who are appointed by both Democratic and Republican presidents. So we don't know what we're going to get picked out of the hat. Are we going to get a judge appointed by Obama, Clinton, Carter, or Bush, Reagan? We don't know. So we make our arguments to appeal to all sides. And we win. I mean, we win, I don't know, the last time I looked, I think we're at like 87, 90% wins. We're not talking lower court, we're talking about the appellate court. 9th Circuit, 6th Circuit, state of New Jersey, et cetera. And of course, we've been to the Supreme Court 5 times in the last 15 months, and we won all 5. 9-0 verdicts. I will take all credit of that. I'm actually not a lawyer. I just play one here on stage, so I'll take that applause for my lawyers. But we won, and we won in decisive, in very important victories. So what does that tell you? Is that when you get your day in court, when you get your moment in the arena, the arguments for religious liberty resonate, and they don't just resonate with conservatives who read National Review. 9-0 verdicts from the Supreme Court tell you that there are arguments about religious liberty that resonate across the whole political spectrum. Now, before you think, well, that's anomalous, we've been defending the phrase under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. We've won in the 9th Circuit. The Supreme Court affirmed that decision. Opponents of that have taken it to the state courts. They chose blue states like Massachusetts and New Jersey. They lost unanimously in Massachusetts, and they just lost in New Jersey. What does that tell you? You can make arguments about religion and religious liberty that will be embraced by the other side. Now let's turn to what's happening politically. We know what's happening. There is a false conflict that's being framed up, and that false conflict says that there's a clash of rights between religious freedom and the rights of people with same-sex attraction, which can go under an acronym that has so many letters I can't get there. What's that? I think that's an entirely false conflict. I think that's a conflict that's engineered because it's very valuable for fundraising and very valuable for bringing out the base and very valuable for political conflict. But I don't think Americans exist at two radically opposed dichotomies here, two ends of the spectrum in which there is no way to construct a live and let live structure. I don't believe that's true at all. How does that get resolved? Partly by refusing to allow that structure to be the structure of debate, also by articulating what's really at stake in court, and I think that's an achievable sort of victory. We'll see that get done if we're lucky. But that doesn't solve the problem. If you establish religious liberty as something that's once again embraced by the vast majority of Americans, and our polling tells you it's like an 88-90% embrace of religious liberty under the sort of original constitutional framework and adapted to modern society. So 80-90% of the people can buy into that. Once you do that, you haven't repaired the moral framework of society, because religious liberty is not the same as religion. Religious liberty gets the government out of the business of dictating morality, about establishing secular humanism or establishing Christianity. It gets the government out of that business, and it forces us to do what we're supposed to do, which is to build a moral society with our neighbors, with our children, with how we vote, et cetera. But we don't get the government doesn't do it for us. So it's religious liberty is what you do to create a country in which human beings, every generation, can establish the right moral order. We have questions.
We've got some questions. I'll answer 3 of those questions right now by saying that, something happened to me around Christmas time. Some of you know I wrote a book called Miracles, right? And the first half of the book, I talk about science and faith. The book is written for everybody. I think if you're a person of faith, it will encourage you profoundly. But I really wrote it for everybody, so you can give to your any neighbor, pretty much anybody. But the first part's about faith and science. And I astounded myself, or I should say I was astounded, not by myself, but I was astounded by when you begin to look at some facts, which you typically don't see in the mainstream media anywhere, you realize that faith in the God of the Bible is not only reasonable, but it is unreasonable to sneer at faith in that God. There is outrageous evidence that if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, you look at the evidence, you tell me what do you think, any open-minded person would have to say, yeah, I didn't realize there's tremendous evidence to believe this stuff. It's not just faith. And the reason I'm saying this is that the first couple chapters of the book I deal with faith and science, and I put it in an op-ed, sent it to the Wall Street Journal. They published it in the Wall Street Journal, and the title was, Is Science Leading Us to Faith? Because this is my conclusion as you look at the fine-tuned argument. I'm not going to get into it now, but that the more we know from science, think of this, okay? Because what's the narrative that the media keeps pushing, that the more we know from science, the more it pushes God out, right? We've been hearing that for about 100 years. Precisely the opposite is true, and you never hear it. And so I kind of discovered this, and I wrote it up in this piece, Is Science Leading Us to God? And they retitled it, Science Increasingly Makes the Case for God. Published in the Wall Street Journal, op-ed page. What happened? It became literally the most popular article published in the history of the Wall Street Journal. Did you hear what I just said? Is that hyperbole? Think of what I just said. 450,000 Facebook likes. This tells you that there is a hunger in America. This is to Bill's point. There is a hunger in America that is not being met. If you're timid about your faith, you're being foolish. What you believe actually is true. It's not true for you. If it's true for you, run from it. It is either true or it is not. And the point is that people are so hungry for this, for these arguments. There are people out there, they're on the fence. They're not ideological conservatives, or they're just open-minded Americans. And when you make the case, whether in a court of law or in the court of popular opinion, people are electrified, and they say, "I've never heard this." I don't know how it got, onto the Wall Street Journal, but I thank God that it did, because all of these people were saying, "I didn't hear this in school. I'm not seeing this on TV." There's a hunger in this nation, thank God, for truth, and there's still enough people out there that are willing to do something. But we've got to make the case, and that's why we've got to be aggressive. We've got to be optimistic. This is doable, but we've got to do it.
Now, we have some questions here, and one of them's missing. I got one, and I think there was a pair. It says, "Eric, you are fantastic. I love you." But I don't see the one addressed to me. So if you just let them know.
I will write it later.
Yeah, there's two questions that I'd like to read both out loud and answer them both, because I think it's going to speak to some of the things that people are asking. It says, "Decent people hear the term religious liberty and think anti-gay. What can we do to change that perception?" And the second question says, "Why does government seem more sympathetic to Muslim expression in public than Christian and Jewish expression?" So why do I lump these two together? Because if you always try to take the approach, I'm going to think well of my opponent, what's going on, right? It's not always easy to do, easier in the morning than in the evening. Here's what. There is a way of thinking that says the underdog always needs to be protected. So who's the underdog? The underdog is somebody who's a minority, just fewer than the other people, or who has suffered in the past. And so we need to reach out to those people. We need to help those people. So when you elevate that way of thinking, you say, well, that's a good thing. Let's help out the underdog. And that's kind of a natural instinct. Religious liberty says, well, I have a call to conscience. Everybody has a call to conscience. Whether you're a member of a minority group or a majority group, you have a call to conscience. So religious liberty doesn't distinguish whether you're in the majority or in the minority. It says you have freedom of religion. So for people who have fully understood and embraced this idea that they should help the underdog, speaking up for the religious liberty of, for example, Muslims, who are a very tiny percentage of America, probably 1% of the American population or less, that seems natural. Yeah, because now you get a 2-for-1 special. It's religious liberty and it's helping the underdog. When you move to the gay rights movement, there is a belief, first of all, this is a minority in America, a shocking, Gallup put like 50% of Americans think that somewhere between 20 and 25% of the American public is gay. I mean, people just don't know. Of course, the reality, no one knows, but it's probably 1.5%, 2%, et cetera. And even then, what's the definition? But without question, people with same-sex attraction are a minority, and without question, they suffered a lot of persecution. Criminalization, social ostracism, cruelty. So you put that together, people say, well, we have to help out gay people. They're the underdog. Well, what becomes clear is when people are trying to help out people who are Muslims, that slots nicely into religious liberty. We defend Muslims and their religious liberty in the United States. It becomes unclear when you come to people with same-sex attraction. And this is what I said earlier. It's a false construction to suggest that there's a clash of rights. Instead, there's a balancing act in which people get their religious freedom and other people have the right to live their lives the way they want to, whether you like or dislike the way they're going to live it out. So that live and let live construction is entirely possible. It's just not being offered up. When you get into the public arena and someone has sort of ambushed you to set you up as a hater or a bigot or a discriminator, it gets exceedingly difficult to walk back from that and to restore a civil argument that allows for that live and let live. So I don't have the magic bullet. I don't have the beautiful one-sentence answer that tells you how to do it. And it's ultimately both a recognition that people really want a just, a fair, and a kind answer to that, and a recognition that freedom means live and let live, letting people have a little distance from each other. My own personal prediction is that, like I said earlier, contests allow people to come to decision. It's very unnerving. Your boxer gets in the ring, first 2 rounds looks terrible, he's getting pummeled. You got to remember, absent of a knockout, it's 15 rounds, right? What's going on in the American public is they're going to learn. They're going to sort through those issues. They're going to swing this way, and then they're going to swing that way. Everyone is very excited or unnerved by the rapid shift in views on marriage. Rapid is as it does, right? People are thinking through this, and if we all do our part, I'm confident that the resolution will be both a greater understanding of what's going on and a pretty common sense outcome for live and let live, as long as we don't allow the courts to pour concrete over the debate, freeze it, to mix my metaphors, the way they did the debate over abortion. So if we let it all work itself out, it will.
Well, my, 1 or 2 sentence answer how we do it is, this is something that I think conservatives we've been really bad at, okay? We've gotten good about politics, legal stuff. Thank God for the Becket Fund. Wow. If you don't know about the Becket Fund, oh my goodness, the work you're doing, unbelievable. The problem is that the cultural narrative, conservatives tend not to be good at the cultural narrative, right? We know everybody in Hollywood, everybody in academia, everybody in the cultural leaders tend to be liberal. They don't even hear conservative arguments. And therefore, people at home watching TV or whatever tend to get the cultural narrative. It's a sort of secular humanist liberal worldview. That's the cultural narrative. We, who are conservative, need to get our narrative out there. Why? Because it's true, and because there are a lot of people that if they ever hear it, they will say, I haven't heard that before. You know what? That's right. Why haven't I heard that before? So the narrative that says that the gays are the underdog and the Christians talking about religious liberty are sort of the powerful majority trying to crush whatever. Okay, that's not true. Now, again, it depends how you define Christians, okay? Most Christians in America, as I said, they're not really Christians. They're just not Jews, atheists, Buddhists, whatever, but they're just kind of floating along on the zeitgeist, and they don't really care about any of these issues very much. But there is a minority of serious Christians, serious people of a number of faiths, but I'm a Christian, so I can speak for Christians, and they say that our view of marriage is going to be crushed by a new secular orthodoxy that says to say that marriage is between a man and a woman is out of bounds, it's bigotry. We won't stand for it in America, and stop being a bully. Now, the thing is that it's up to us to get out the narrative. Since Americans are really genuinely good-hearted people as a culture, this is the upside and the downside, right? That we're generous. When we see an underdog, just as Bill said, we kind of root for the underdog naturally. That's good. But the problem is that, I was on the phone, I just 2 weeks ago I started a radio show, okay? It's across the country. You can just go to metaxastalk.com or my website, ericmetaxas.com, and you can find it. And I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff. It's not a political show, but I will now and again, as you can imagine, be talking about these kinds of issues. And I was on the phone yesterday with Ryan Anderson, who is a winsome voice for traditional marriage. And I said, Ryan, I want you to come on, and I want you to talk about how you have been persecuted, ostracized, treated like garbage, even though you have been very winsome and generous and kind and intelligent and rational, because these stories need to get out there. Because in this case, you're the underdog. You're the person that a fair-minded American should be rooting for. But they'll never hear your story on the news. Fox News, actually, has been terrible about this kind of stuff. They're the best, and they've not been great at this. They'd rather talk about the fiscal cliff or something. And I'm sorry.
We're going to run out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just give me 10 seconds.
I want you to tell these people why, in your heart of hearts and in everyday life, you are extraordinarily positive, even when you talk to Ryan Anderson and he gets pushed around.
That's exactly right. Because in the United States of America, I'm allowed to have a radio show. I'm allowed to talk about this stuff. And when I talk about it, I believe, just like getting that piece in the Wall Street Journal, there are people out there who are going to go, yeah, but we've got to talk about it. We can't say, well, the battle's over. So I talked to him. He had, the Washington Post, of all places, did a fair-minded piece on Ryan Anderson. You ready for this? Friends Academy posted it on their Facebook page.
That's
and
his
said,
high school.
Look at this. Look, our alum, Ryan Anderson, got a piece in the Washington Post talking about how he's this winsome voice for traditional marriage, whatever. They posted it on their Facebook page. The alums freaked out because they're notoriously liberal. They made him take it off the Facebook page of Friends Academy. In effect saying, even posting that Washington Post article that makes Ryan Anderson, that bigot, look slightly positive is offensive. You need to take it down. So Ryan told the story on my radio program yesterday, and I thought there are all kinds of Americans out there thinking, that's interesting. That is very interesting. First of all, if you're an alum of Friends Academy, you should raise hell over this issue, because can you imagine that they took down a Facebook? I mean, just on the face of it, it's unbelievable. That's where we are in America. If we don't use our voices, whatever voice God has given you, we all have a voice. Somebody's looking at you and listening to you. If you don't use your voice, use your money, use your time, use your energy, the battle is winnable if we don't joyfully, like Reagan, the happy warrior. We've got to know that even if we lose, we're supposed to fight the battle with joy.
But we're
not going to lose. We're not going to lose. Imagine when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. What do you think all the people in the State Department said to him? You can't have that in your speech. You can't say that. He said, I'm going to say it.
And here's the
thing.
And
he said it. And what happened to the Iron Curtain, ladies and gentlemen? I rest my case.
Right. Let's end on this most positive note, which is the American public, when you really push them and explore with them deeply, are more than ready and willing to support a society which embraces religious freedom and are mostly personally interested in finding out the answers to that great question of all. Why am I here? What is my purpose? They're ready. We still have a very vibrant society with lots of avenues to tell our story and bring people to the point where they need to be. Contest and conflict should not be a cause for fear. It should be a moment of excitement. That's when you get to tell the story. That's when you get to get people out of there every day and hear it. And then the final lesson, which we all know, especially here at National Review, regimes that look overwhelmingly powerful, regimes that can take away not just your social standing, but that can put you in the gulag, can take away your children forever, etc. Regimes like that fall apart in a day because they're brittle. In our country, when the only real tool is an ever-growing federal government and social pressure, that's a very brittle regime. And we have a vibrancy and an enthusiasm that's ready, willing, and able, and a religious vitality in this country which is profound. I travel around the country. People are really seeking the answers. So I'm telling you, this is a battle we're going to win, if not in my lifetime, although I think in the lifetime of the grandchild I'm about to find out, boy or girl, right this second. So thank you very much for having us here.
Unbelievable. Terrific.